Welcome back to Philosophy Roulette. Just getting started here. So, new day, new review. Okie doke. Let's see, what do we got? Oh yeah, homunculi are people too. Lewis definition. You know, I just don't want to do this one because it looks too cutesy to me. I got plenty of views, so. Truth and existence. Halbach has argued that Tarski bad conditionals are not ontologically conservative over classical logic. But his argument, yeah, see, if there's too much logic stuff, then I have to start talking, like, I have to read the symbols out, and that's just no fun. Classicality lost K3 and LP after the fall. So, I mean, yeah, there's no more classicality if you're like K3 or LP. It is commonly held that the ascription of truth to a sentence is intersubstitutable with that very sentence. However, the simplest subclassical logics available to proponents of this view, namely K3 and LP, are hopelessly weak for many purposes. Yeah, that's why people don't do those. In this article, I argue that this is much more of a problem for proponents of LP than for proponents of K3. The strategy for recapturing classicality offered by proponents of LP are far less promising. Yes, but if you're going to do logic of paradox, you don't want to be classical. Right, yeah. Anyway, I saw some recent work by Hartree Field. He probably knows how to fix everything. Yeah, so we're going to move on. Too much logic again. Attitude reports, cognitive products, attitudinal objects. Ooh, you have to check your attitudinal perspective there, my friend. Oh, it's a responsa, so I'd have to have read the other thing. A normative argument against explosion is more logic stuff, probably. Mark Pinder, one strategy for defending power consistent. More power consistency, okay. Logics involve raising normative arguments against the inference rule explosion. Yes, do not. If logic explodes, you get problems. Florian Steinberger systematically criticizes a wide variety of formulations of such arguments. I argue that for one such formulation, Steinberger's criticisms fail. I then sketch an argument available to those who deny dialethism in defense of the formulation in request. You know, this might be a good warm-up. Let's see what we got. I've been doing like 2 reviews a session, like I cut the stream just because I don't want to do any video editing, so, and then start again usually a few minutes later. The chat remains active though, so if I'm still here in the chat, you can even if the video stream's not up. Alright, let's see if we got the file. No file. Why is there no file? There's a file. Yay. Okay, they've got some. Oh, good for you with like a splash screen. Who are you? Okay, I don't know. This is sort of like the research and scholarly communications team like outputs this thing. Alright, I guess that's nice. Alright, cool. So, an normative argument against explosion it is. And here we go. A normative argument against explosion. Mark Pinder, U Birmingham. This is the accepted version. Oh, that's kind of cool. Usually it's like the last corrected proof or something. Like last pre-corrected proof. Whatever's. One strategy for defending power-consistent logics involves raising normative arguments against the inference rule explosion. X quadlibit. Yeah. Florian Steinberger systematically criticizes a wide variety of formulations of such arguments. I argue that for one such formulation, Steinberger's criticisms fail. Then I section an argument available to those who deny dialethism in defense of the formulation in question. Okay, and we've got logics. X quadla. I get this X quadlibit? Yeah, X quadlibit. Paraconsistent logics reject the following inference rule. From explosion, exp, p, and p, not p, therefore q. So from a contradiction, p and not p, or p not p, you can derive anything q. Such logics are typically packaged with dialethism, the view that there are true contradictions, but need not be. Well, there are a lot of gradations before you get to dialethism. There's like weak, strong, and blah 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 blah. The dialethist may endorse explosion if she is willing to countenance the truth of every proposition. Yeah, that's trivialism. I've not actually seen too many of that, but hey, maybe Azuni 2013 is interesting. The non-dialethist may have independent reasons for denying AEXP. A popular strategy for defending paraconsistent logics. Look, endorsing a paraconsistent logic is not the same thing as being dialethist. If you're dialethist, you need to use a paraconsistent logic because you need to be able to handle these things. But being paraconsistent does not commit you to the claim that you actually believe these things exist in the world. It just means that you think that logic is preferable for whatever reason. Preferability in logics you choose your logic for lots of reasons. A popular strategy for defending paraconsistent logics involves raising normative considerations against explosion. Consider this argument. One ought to believe the logical consequences of one's beliefs, but in fact most people have inconsistent beliefs. Suppose explosion for reductio. It follows that most people ought to believe Q, where Q is any proposition whatsoever. But for any given person, there is some proposition that she ought not to believe. It follows from the preceding that for some R, she ought to believe R and ought not to believe R. This is a contradiction. Thus, by reductio ad absurdum, explosion is not a valid rule of inference. Call this a normative argument against explosion. Let the bridge principle in such arguments be the premise that Let the bridge principle in such an argument be the premise that connects logical consequence with normative claims about beliefs. The bridge principle is the above. One ought to believe the logical consequences of one's beliefs. There are at least two serious objections to B. The first is due to Harmon 84. Suppose that one's current beliefs have an absurdity as a logical consequence. Then given B, one ought to believe the absurdity, but the consequence is false. One ought rather to revise an antecedent belief. The second is due to Broom 99. Each proposition is a logical consequence of itself. So given B, one ought to believe everything one in fact does believe, but that consequence is false. Sometimes one forms beliefs without, say, taking due care as to whether the beliefs are true. Sure. Interesting stuffs, but let's continue. Building on work by McFarlane, Florian Steinberger investigates whether there is a successful formulation of the normative argument against explosion by systematically considering alternative bridge principles. He argues, not concluding, there is no successful way of reformulating the normative argument. I mean, this is one normative argument, so I would assume there would be many bridge principles, one or more for each argument, because it's not like this is the only argument normative against explosion. I mean, maybe there's others, or maybe there's a claim that all of them have something in common, but why should that'd be a pretty strong claim anyway, so we'll see. Alright, no success. Steinberger's criticisms are largely successful, but fail for one particular bridge principle. I introduced the bridge principle in section 2, respond to Steinberger's criticisms in 3, and argue that bridge principles can be independently justified in 4. In 5, I sketch an argument available to non-dialethis in defense of the corresponding formulation of the normative argument. I do not aim to show that the relevant formulation of the normative argument is successful. Such a conclusion could not be established in a single article, but nonetheless I provide a clear strategy for developing it into a compelling case against explosion, at least in the eyes of the non-dialethist. Given that one, normative arguments have recently received substantial criticism, especially in Steinberger 2016, and two, most non-dialethist endorse explosion, the strategy is important. Yeah, all classical logic runs on explosion, so why should they get rid of it, or want to get rid of it? So that would be an interesting conclusion. The B2 formulation. The Riggs principle in question is this. If P1 to Pn implies Q, then if S believes all of the P's, S has the feasible reason to believe Q. So yeah, if you believe all the premises, then you should believe the conclusion. Okay. Following McFarlane, Steinberger calls it CR+. Using B2, the normative argument is formulated as follows. For some ordinary person S, an inconsistent set of propositions phi, explosion is valid. Hypothesis for reductio. S believes each member of phi. If P1 to Pn implies Q, then if S believes all the P's, S has a feasible reason to believe Q. That's B2. Even if S's set of beliefs is inconsistent and any proposition whatsoever is entailed by it, courtesy of explosion, there are proposition S has no reason whatsoever to believe. Premise. S has no reason whatsoever to believe R from D. Phi implies R from A. S has the feasible reason to believe R from B. Contradiction. Okay, so it's just a formulation of the stuff up from above. Explosion is invalid by reductio. I'm not so sure about this argument, because you're using the reductio to prove it's invalid. I mean, just the other day, didn't we go over that? Yes, we did, in Aristotle, that you can't prove that the law of what was it called? Bivalence. You can't prove these things to be in the logic. This is like a ground for the logic that you're doing, not something you prove within the logic. Okay, I'm a little skeptical of this dialogical strategy here, a dialectical strategy. Yeah, I mean, if you try to disprove a rule of logic and you use that rule of logic in doing it, I guess you have to, but like, it's yeah. Well, we'll see. Call this the B2 formulation of the normative argument. Man, perhaps it's too early in the morning. I haven't drank enough coffee. Throughout this paper, I take it as common ground that many ordinary people have inconsistent beliefs. As such, I assume B without argument. B. Yeah. Okay, so you're endorsing the sort of the KK thesis. You believe what you believe. Moreover, Steinberger's principal criticism concerns C, B2. That is B2. Provisionally assume D, although I dropped this assumption in 5. As Steinberger notes, B2 avoids both Harman and Bruton's criticism. It does not yield any consequence about what one ought to believe. However, Steinberger raises two alternative objections to B2. First, that is implausibly strong. Second, that is implausibly weak. Alright, so what this is doing is sort of using the concept of how we believe things like the logical concept of how we believe things, because that's what's going on. You have to, I mean, belief is bigger than what can happen in this little logical exposition. So this logical conception of belief being used here is being shown that explosion doesn't work with that concept. So this is what I was trying to get at earlier. If you are going to argue that explosion is bad or is invalid, and then you create yourself a contradiction, why did the contradiction get created? Well, they're saying, well, it's due to explosion not being valid, but to make that argument go through, you need to appeal to something, and in this case, it is the belief concept that's being deployed here along this. So all of these have belief in them, though this doesn't. But belief. So there's a question of exactly what belief amounts to here. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't look like we're going to get a discussion on belief in this paper. We're just going to assume certain things of what it means to believe each member of phi. Okay. First, Steinberger writes that if B2 is philosophically tenable, then I do have a reason, albeit a defeasible one, for believing any logical consequence of my belief. And so, saying that I have no reason whatsoever to believe P given my background beliefs, and my evidence is to say that I could not possibly believe, not merely I do not have any reason to believe, any set of propositions that entail P, otherwise by B2 I would have reason to believe P, but that seems implausibly strong. As I understand it, the objection is this: hold S's background beliefs and evidence fixed. Then B2 implies, if S could believe a set of propositions that entails P, then S has a defeasible reason to believe P. If S could believe a set of propositions that entails P, then S would have a reason, or has a dispute. Well, if they could believe a set of propositions that entail P, then they could. Where's the modal going in there? No. And one entails the implausibly strong conclusion that saying S has no reason whatsoever to believe P is to say that S could not possibly believe any set of propositions that entail P. Thus, according to Steinberger, B2 is implausibly strong. Okay, so basically, because P is very, very bad apparently, so if S could do it, then S has a defeasible reason. So the fact that there is a defeasible reason to believe P, even without entailing P, you have to reject those, because that would be something that would eventually lead you to having a false belief and a contradictory one, I guess. I agree that the conclusion saying S has no reason whatsoever to believe P is to say that S could not possibly believe any set of propositions that entails P is implausibly strong. However, I disagree with Steinberger's suggestion that this is a problem for B2. Pakshay Steinberger, B2 does not imply 1. What was 1? B2 does not imply 1. Okay, so B2 again was, I think that's C. Yeah, if believes this, then I believe Q. Okay. So this is if you have all these beliefs that lead to Q, S believes all the P's, then there's a defeasible reason to believe Q, but we should not think that could believe, because there's something modally coming on here that is slightly different. Does not imply 1. B2 underpins an inference from what S does believe to what her defeasible reasons are. It does not permit an inference from what could believe. Yeah, the modal question. To obtain one from B2, Steinberger would require an auxiliary premise. If 2S could believe a set of propositions that entails P, then S does believe a set of propositions that entails P. Yeah, that would be a very strange thing. Just because you could believe something does not mean that you do. However, Steinberger would not be entitled to assume 2. The most plausible defense 2 appeals to 2 claims. S has inconsistent beliefs and that explosion is valid. Yeah, because then you'd believe everything. So if you could believe it, you would believe it. These 2 claims don't imply the truth of 2's consequence, thus 2, but Steinberger is not entitled to assume explosion is valid, as this precisely is what is at issue. That begs the question. The consequence of B2 is in the vicinity of 1. The only consequence of B2 in the vicinity of 1 is this. If S could believe a set of propositions that entails P, then S could have a defeasible reason to believe P. Yeah, this is what I was trying to get at before, but said nicely here. But 3 is unproblematic, so Steinberger's first objection fails. The second objection is that B2 is implausibly weak. B2 in no way requires of me that I should revise my beliefs in light of their consequence. Sure, though, logical coherence does demand I modify my belief set so as to avoid all blatant inconsistencies. I mean, this is again putting a lot of weight on the concept, the logical understanding of belief. Yeah, it's like paradox of the preface. You know, you've got there's something wrong in the whole set, and I don't know what it is, so I'm going to be endorsing something contradictory eventually, but I don't know what any individual one is okay. And it's like, well, how do you slice these things up? Yeah. No, and there's also the shorter one. If I could have written a shorter essay, I would have. It's always nice. It's like, well, how could you possibly shorten it then? You couldn't have written it. This objection presupposes that B2 is intended to capture the normative status of logic. Yeah. Okay, so logic now is supposed to normatively affect belief because it calls out these bad thoughts. You're supposed to revise your thoughts because of the logical problems. However, this position is not required for the B2 formulation of the normative argument to go through. On the natural reading of D, on which no reason whatsoever implies there is no reason, logical or otherwise, there is no equivocation. I return to this point in the next section. But even if B2 is intended to capture the normative status of logic, the objection fails. As Steinberger recognizes, B2 makes no claim of completeness. It is compatible with there being additional bridge principles that, with B2, jointly capture the normative status of logic. Yeah, there's a lot. Even if this one fails, that's not going to exhaust the arguments that logic is normative or anything about logic. Really, this is not this argument is not designed to be universal. Consider Steinberger's claim that B2 does not capture the demand that one modifies one's belief set to avoid blatant inconsistencies. First, note that the demand may be too strong. Suppose that Mike is deeply conflicted about science and religion, resulting in an inconsistent belief set. You know, let's not do science for religion. Let's do like cake versus ice cream. Alright, so we've got cake and ice cream, and like I just am torn up, and I've got some inconsistent beliefs about that. Say because he takes there to be an overwhelming evidence that there is no ice cream, but takes himself to feel an emotional connection to a personal belief in ice cream. Even if logic generates a strong reason for Mike to revise his beliefs, well, logic and ice cream. Even if logic generates a strong reason for Mike to revise his beliefs, it is at least plausible that that reason is defeasible. If both his evidence and emotional connection are sufficiently strong, then perhaps Mike has overriding reason to retain his inconsistent beliefs. It is plausible then that logic does not demand, all things considered, that an inconsistent belief set be revised, but merely provides a defeasible reason, however strong, to do so. Now, modifying a belief set to avoid inconsistencies can require ceasing to believe, but B2 only generates a reason to believe. Well, you could have reason to cease to believe. Thus, B2 needs to be supplemented with a principle that generates a reason not to believe. For example, B3, if P1 to Pn implies Q, then S believes all the P's. S has a defeasible reason not to believe, not Q. So this is like a modus tollens. Alright. Excuse me. Suppose that I believe P and Q and learn that P if and only if not Q. Given B2, I have defeasible reason to believe each of not P, not Q, and not P if and only if not Q. Given B3, I have a defeasible reason not to believe each of those P, Q, and P if and only if not Q. These reasons do not themselves tell me which beliefs I ought to revise, but merely that I have to revise my belief set in one or more of the prescribed ways. What I ought to do is determine by the relative strengths of my other reasons. If I have better reason to believe Q and P if and only if not Q than to believe P, then I may have overriding reason to revise the belief P. I ought to cease believing that P and form the belief that not P. I have equal reason to believe Q and P, and a better reason to believe P if and only if not Q. And I have overriding reason to cease believing Q and P, but not form any beliefs. This is all as it should be, in general logic alone cannot find the false proposition in an inconsistent set. Yeah. So although B2 on its own might be implausibly weak, it can be supplemented with other bridge principles. For example, take B2 and B3 together. B2 and B3 generate reasons to revise an inconsistent belief set, thereby avoiding blatant inconsistencies. Perhaps other bridge principles would also be required to fully capture the normative status of logic. Either way, the plausibility of B2 does not turn on its being complete. So Steinberger's second objection fails. An independent justification of B2. As noted above, however, the B2 formulation of the normative argument goes through regardless of whether B2 captures the normative status of logic. To obtain a contradiction, B2 need merely state that in relevant circumstances S has a defeasible reason of some kind to believe Q. Call that the neutral reading of B2. On the neutral reading of B2, it can be independently justified. Consider the following principles. S is entitled to take the contents of S beliefs as evidence. Whoa. Just because I believe something does not make that evidence. It just means I think it. Like, okay, I don't know about you, but like, I'm wrong about lots of stuff. So, I mean, I take it as reason to believe stuff is because I believe it is like I believe it, but that doesn't mean it's like evidence for what? The evidence of belief? Like, okay. If P is a logical consequences of S is evidence and S has a defeasible reason to believe P. No, that seems like terribly circular. Like, I'm sorry. If I believe it, that's evidence and therefore it has evidence. It's like, well, the book says God exists, as like using the religious example, therefore God exists because the book says so. It's like, well, I say my bank account has $1 million in it. That don't make my bank account have $1 million in it just because I believe it. Like, that's called being delusional. Okay, delusions aside, together P1 and P2 imply that S is entitled to take herself to have defeasible reason to believe the logical consequences of her beliefs. Okay. Yes, you would believe that, but I don't see why you'd want to have P1 and P2. And plausibly, if one is entitled to take oneself to have defeasible reason to believe P, then one does in fact have defeasible reason to believe P. One's entitlement to take oneself to have a defeasible reason is itself a defeasible reason. If this is right, then B2 follows, and P1 and P2 jointly support B2. P's support B's. Now I want peanut butter. P1 and P2 can be independently justified. For example, Timothy Williamson argues extensively for P1. Okay, well, I'd have to check out this stuff. Building on the view that evidence is propositional, he argues first that the contents of one knowledge constitutes one's evidence, and second that one is entitled to take one's belief as knowledge. Whoa, why is one entitled to take one's beliefs as knowledge? I mean, does doxastic just fall right into epistemic? I don't understand this. My apologies. Williamson puts his account to substantial philosophical work, explaining how thought experiments generate new knowledge and constructing a strategy for responding to any given form of skepticism. So there are established grounds for accepting P1. Alright, I'll have to just take that on just as a sort of hypothesis for this, a premise for this paper. Consider P2. It should be read as neutral as to whether the defeasible reason is logical or otherwise. In addition, note that P2 states that S has a defeasible reason to believe the logical consequences of the propositions that constitute her evidence, not of the propositions for which she has evidence. Okay, so let me make sure I got the logical consequences of the proposition that constitute her evidence, for which she has evidence. For example, suppose that Sarah is on a jury. Her evidence consists of two propositions: that Jan was seen walking suspiciously towards Mike, that Mike's little bag was subsequently stolen. That is, according to P2, Sarah has a feasible reason to believe that Jan was seen walking suspiciously towards the victim of a bag theft. But P2 is silent about whether has a feasible reason to say that Jan stole Mike's bag. The latter is not a logical consequence of Sarah's evidence. No, okay. These are just, what was P2? P2. Yeah, so you can do, so logical consequence is follows. Okay, so that's just, you're getting the logical consequences of your beliefs. The justification of P2 resides in the fact that evidence-based disciplines, sciences, law, perhaps philosophy, etc., go far beyond it. In such disciplines, evidence is taken to confer defeasible reason to believe a proposition that the evidence merely supports. But it would be difficult to maintain that such a claim while denying that we have defeasible reason to believe the logical content of our evidence. Our use of the evidence informing beliefs about the world then appears to presuppose P2. Well, let's talk about this for a sec. There's a lot of ways people infer things. Usually logic is taken to be a very solid basis. So all the other, you have to understand, like, if you're going to be in a court of law, you're not going to be arguing over power consistency and dialethism, where these things are at issue. So the logic is generally more secure. I mean, logic takes a long time to change. So it's not at issue when you're in a court of law. If you're discussing those problems right here, then really what happens in a court of law doesn't actually apply, because if you're taking these things to be changeable here, then you can't really appeal to the other disciplines as evidence, because they're relying upon these things as laws. But when you're in the process of discussing the laws again, then they can't be appealed to. That is sort of the whole problem here. Okay, but that may not matter. This may just be some of the bugaboos I have. Let's see. If this is right, then on a neutral reading, B2 can be independently justified. Yeah, see, I'm not 100% sold on this. It can be justified in those other cases. If you're going to do it in this, if you're using the evidence from those other cases here, you have to justify the presupposition that the other uses of logic outside of philosophy departments has bearing at this point on this topic. The problem is it doesn't. This is the exact topic in question, and so you can't import the evidence from the other places, because it is begging the question, because those places already assume the stability of non-contradiction or explosion or something. Okay, but it doesn't make me right. It's just this may be caught up on something here. Yeah. A defeasible normative argument. Yeah, so I mean, all these complaints I have, they may not matter. The argument may yet go through. Let's find out. Even if the above considerations are accepted, it does not automatically follow that the B2 formulation of the normative argument is defensible. For there's another premise D which might be false. I have heard the following argument raised against D. If S has... Why is this sentence here? I don't know. If S has inconsistent beliefs and explosion is valid, then for any given R is a logical consequence of S's beliefs. But if R is a logical consequence of S's beliefs, then given how easily defeasible reasons can be obtained, S does indeed have defeasible reasons to believe R. It follows that for every proposition, S has some reason to believe that proposition. So D is false. Yeah, so if you can just get any proposition because you have explosion, then you can just generate stuff that would count as evidence or defeasible reasons for any of the other stuff, because you have everything. All the sentences, all the propositions. Call that the weak reason argument. The weak reason argument straightforwardly fails. It assumes explosion is valid in order to infer that R is a logical consequence of S's beliefs, which is what makes it plausible that S has defeasible reason to believe R. However, the validity of explosion is precisely what is at issue, so it cannot legitimately be assumed. Yeah, so if you're trying to use this to show that explosion shouldn't be used, then you can't use it to show that it shouldn't be used. Okay. But maybe you could use it to show in this one case it should be used and then nowhere else? Could you use it like sometimes and not all the time? I mean, it would be if S has inconsistent beliefs and explosion is pertinent here, then for any given R, then the argument might go through. Yeah, I wouldn't know why you'd want to say that, but someone might argue such things. Well, I think the author is right in this stuff. To be clear, the specific wording of D does not permit the assumption that explosion is valid. Notice that D has the following form, even if P, Q. So you've got P and Q plus P, Q. Where P is a proposition that S's set of beliefs is inconsistent and a proposition whatsoever is entailed by it, courtesy of explosion. And Q is the proposition that there are propositions that S has no reason whatsoever to believe. Now, 4 is stated in this way to highlight the fact that Q is not intended to rule out P, but 4 is in fact equivalent to 5 if P then Q, and if not P then Q, which is equivalent to Q. Well, under certain logics, but yes. So to argue against 4, one can argue... Yeah, again, like, how exactly are you deriving this? What logic are we using here? Because if you're in classical logic, you have explosion. You can do it. You can... Because... Alright. The logic here, I'm sure... I mean, the logics here matter. To argue against 4, one can argue that P is true and Q is false, or that not P is true and Q is false, or simply that Q is false. It is insufficient to assume P and argue that on the assumption that Q is false. I will now use these comments to sketch an argument in favor of D. To reiterate 2 points, first, I do not take the following to establish D. My ultimate aim is not to show that B2 formulation is successful, that we should therefore reject explosion. I aim to provide a clear strategy for potentially providing a potentially compelling defense of the B2 formulation. Second, the argument in favor of D is available only to non-dialethists. As such, one could straightforwardly resist the argument by endorsing dialethism. That's not really a problem. There's only so many of those in the world. However, for any theorist unwilling to countenance trivialism, the view that every proposition is both true and false, dialethism would in turn lead to the rejection of explosion. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason to be dialethist, because you don't want to have to deal with explosion all the time, because explosion is bad. In light of the equivalence between 4 and 5, one can argue for D by defending for some S each of the following. If S's set of beliefs is inconsistent and any proposition whatsoever is entailed by it, courtesy of explosion, then there are propositions that S has no reason whatsoever to believe. If there are some propositions not entailed by S's set of beliefs, either because her belief set is consistent or because explosion is invalid, then there are propositions that S has no reason to believe whatsoever to believe. Alright. S's beliefs are... If is entailed by it, then there are propositions that S has no reason whatsoever to believe. Yeah... Explosion. Wait. If it has the inconsistent beliefs, but then you have no reason whatsoever to believe, well, you have no reason whatsoever to believe them, and reason whatsoever to believe them, because everything follows. And then if you are not explosive, then you don't have the both statements. I think. No reason whatsoever. Alright. Not sure about this stuff. Let's consider a case in which S is an ordinary person, Sandy. Suppose that Sandy's beliefs are either jointly consistent or else they are inconsistent in the following easily imaginable way. She has double booked herself without yet realizing it, and believes both that she is going to the theater on Monday night and that she is not going to the theater on Monday night. Moreover, let us suppose, well, no one's going to the theater right now. They're all closed in New York, so you're not going anywhere. Yeah, my parents got us tickets to a nice play, and it is postponed. Moreover, let us suppose there is some proposition R that except perhaps via her contradictory beliefs and explosion, R is not a logical consequence of Sandy's beliefs. Sandy's beliefs do not otherwise tell in favor or against R, and that there are no other, say, practical, epistemic, or moral reasons for Sandy to maintain or form a belief about R. For example, perhaps Sandy has no interest in the probability of coin tosses and no reason to have such interest, and R is the proposition that the next coin tossed by the author of the present paper will land heads. Or perhaps Sandy has no interest in the history of Icelandic names or present, no reason to have such interest, and R is a proposition that cannot be reading that is Sven Bjornsson is a former president of Iceland. Now consider 8. Suppose that the antecedent is true. Sandy's beliefs just happen to be jointly consistent. Then it seems straightforwardly follow that from our description that Sandy has no reason whatsoever to believe R. Her beliefs do not tell for or against R, and she has no other practical, epistemic, or moral reason to believe it. So there are propositions that Sandy has no reason to believe whatsoever to believe, hence 8. Turn to 7. Suppose that the antecedent is true of Sandy. Her set of beliefs is inconsistent because of the double booking and any proposition whatsoever entailed by that set cursive explosion. But now consider propositions are such that the only candidate defeasible reason that Sandy might have to believe R is entailed. Reason that Sandy might have to believe R is that it is entailed by her set of beliefs. As before, R might be the next coin tossed by the author of the present papal land heads, or that Sven Bjornsson is a former president of Iceland. If Sandy has a defeasible reason to believe R, then this reason is courtesy of explosion. Okay, so it's parasitic on the on 8 because that's like sort of like a subtraction. So it's like you're taking all of her consistent beliefs and taking them away, and then saying what beliefs she'd have, courtesy of explosion, and that's how you're saying they all, in some sense, depend on explosion. I will shortly sketch an argument that Sandy lacks a defeasible reason to believe R. To this end, we will need the following principle. I mean, the same sounds like a relevance logic. Like why, like it. Yeah, your beliefs have to be relevantly related to your premises. Okay. A defeasible reason to believe that not P is ipso facto reason not to believe that P. This principle is highly plausible given a denial of dialetheism. Suppose that dialetheism is false, then there are no true contradictions, and propositions of the form P and not P cannot be simultaneously true, so the proof of not P precludes the truth of P, in which case a defeasible reason to believe the former is ipso facto a defeasible reason not to believe the latter, hence P3. Okay. Yeah. So if you have a defeasible reason not to believe something, then you have the reason to believe that something, or vice versa. Alright, so it's just the transparency of negation here and belief. Again, this is the question of how does belief work here? We're treating belief again in the sort of logical way where it's transparent, maybe just because you have the belief that not something does not necessarily imply that negation the negation is transparent, that you can just get the not belief. That's fair. I mean, it's fine, but it's just a point to note that how belief is being used here. Let us sketch an argument then that Sandy lacks defeasible reason to believe R. Were Sandy to possess such a reason, it would be generated by a chain of reason along the following lines. Sandy's going to theater Monday, Sandy's not going to theater, therefore R. By a parity of reasoning, the following chain would thus likewise generate an equivalent reason for believing not R. Sandy's going to the theater Monday, Sandy's not going to theater on Monday, therefore not R. By P3, 10 generates a defeasible reason not to believe R, that is, Sandy would have a defeasible reason to believe R only in virtue of the chain of reasoning that by yeah, see, there's some sort of relevance here. By parity of reasoning would otherwise likewise generate an equivalent defeasible reason not to believe R. Moreover, as nothing here relies on the specificity of details 9-10, the point generalizes for any defeasible reason that Sandy has to believe R. She likewise has, by parity of reason, an equivalent defeasible reason not to believe R. We now have a choice. Either we say that Sandy has a pair of defeasible reasons to believe R and not believe R that are equal and opposite, generating no resultant reason. See, what is... so, how is this generated on this picture? No. Neither the reasons generated by 9 nor the reason generated by 10 is undermined by the other. Both reasons are in play. They merely cancel each other out. What is it to cancel something out? I'd like to know. I mean, this isn't like a... if you're in logic, is it the transparency of double negation that cancels each other out, or is it some semantic thing? So I mean, alright, these are my worries. Or we say that Sandy has no defeasible reason to believe R, nor defeasible reason not to believe R. Okay. So you're saying either they cancel, or you say you have neither reason nor non-reason. So this would be some sort of like gap in reasoning. Which option should we take? Although there's clearly a conceptual difference between the two pictures, it seems no practical epistemic difference whatsoever. Sandy's overriding reason will be precisely the same either way, so the phenomenon do not dictate that we adopt either picture over the other. Yeah, sure. I mean, she's going to do one of the things. It doesn't really matter if she has reasons for one, or that you just have no reasons. Have too many reasons or too few reasons. Nevertheless, in at least 3 respects, the latter picture is the more natural option. First, it is less cumbersome. The latter picture does not posit pairs of reasons that are superfluous to our understanding of Sandy's situation, and in that respect, more elegant. Second, relatedly, it is potentially problematic to posit equal and opposite reasons that can never come apart, and thus cannot have practical, epistemic, moral, etc. effect. After all, their practical, epistemic, moral import is their reason to trust. It is not clear that we are justified in positing reasons that cannot influence how we ought to think or act. Third, notice that in both pictures it will likely appear to Sandy that she has no reason whatsoever to believe R and no reason whatsoever not to believe R. This appearance, however, is born only out of the latter picture. Thus, the latter picture is less revisionary and accords more with our first-person experience. Okay. This is all sort of the position of the non-dialethist. I mean, you're free to be a non-dialethist, and the dialethists are free to be the dialethist, but it's just a mere... this is all the... Run into this the last few papers. You just have fewer things. You're doing the Occam's razor on this. Say, look, fewer things are better than more things, and so therefore the dialethist has too many reasons. You have reasons to do something and reasons not to do that thing. In this case, it's just like, well, you have no reasons because you've got a inconsistency, and so it's just, let's not muddy the waters with too many things. I mean, it's fine, but I mean, in some sense, you've already... This is just outlining the picture. This is not... If someone is not convinced, as the author has said, is already dialethist, this won't convince anyone. This is just sort of reinforcing the viewpoint here. Each of these considerations suggests that, at least to some extent, it is more natural to adopt the latter picture, on which Sandy neither has reason to believe R nor reason not to believe R. Of course, a detailed examination of these pictures would be required to provide a compelling case, and many questions remain. What exactly it is about claims of reasons like 9 and 10 that means that they generate no reasons as opposed to equal and opposite reasons? Yeah, these all need... Does the conclusion apply to other parallel chains of reasoning that do not invoke explosion? Yeah, I mean, let's go look at, I don't know relevant logic, but this is sort of like, if you're going to do chains of reasoning that you need justifications. You've got justification logics where you've got specific chains because they have specific presupposition. You need to have already accepted the premises. The conclusions have to specifically be relevantly related to the premises. And while we should expect there to be balanced reasons for, at least in some, balanced reasons. What's this balance here? In some cases, such as cases in which the reasons can come apart, must equal and opposite reasons always be separable. I can explore such issues here, but nonetheless we have a clear strategy for arguing that on present assumptions we should adopt the latter picture, the picture in which Sandy has neither reason to believe R nor reason not to believe R. It would follow that the latter picture, given our description of the case, Sandy does not have any reason whatsoever to believe R. The picture rules out the only candidate defeasible reasons. So given that picture, there are propositions that Sandy has no reason whatsoever to believe, but that is a consequent of 7. So we have sketched an argument for the consequent of 7 from its antecedent. Hence we have sketched an argument for 7. What the heck? Oh yeah, that was the that was the one I just rejected outright because I thought it was crazy. Thus we have sketched an argument for 7 and 8, and thus for D. So as things stand, we have concluded that B2 formulation of the normative argument is defeasible. Yeah, I'm gonna go back up and look at that real quick and see if I can say anything more intelligent than I did before about it. There's a defeasible formulation of the normative argument against explosion. I have responded to Steinberger's objection that the formulation sketch is defensive of two key premises, that the Briggs principle be 2, and that claim, even if S have beliefs, is inconsistent in any proposition whatsoever entailed by it, courtesy of explosion. There are propositions S has no reason whatsoever to believe. These arguments herein are not conclusive. They provide a clear strategy for defending B2 formulation of the normative argument available to any non-dialethist. In light of the recent criticisms leveled at normative arguments, this is important. Further examination is required before we can establish whether or not normative considerations tell in favor of power-consistent logic. Okay, so, yeah. Right. Let's get back up to this list all the way up here. I mean, it's a question why we like normativity of logic. Like, really, because, like, how often do we get, like, contradictory beliefs? So, if you believe you're going to the theater and you're not going to believe the theater, and then something else follows from that, I mean, generally what you really normally do is, like, you say, oh wait, I'm confused here, and then you don't have any conclusions that follow from that. It's not that you have reason to believe R and not reason to not believe R, or yeah, it's alright, so let's look briefly back at this. Let's see, did I do something silly? Yeah, I'm very confused about the, just because I believe something, I mean, I can give you the reason I believe something, but I'm not sure what the strength of the feasibility is here. Again, what is the notion of belief being used, and how does that relate to the normativity? I mean, you've got a presupposition somewhere that beliefs should not be inconsistent, and that they are consistent in a logically relevant way here. Yeah. P1 to B leaves all P defeasible. Yeah. And then there was the other problem. If you're going to make a normative argument against the inference rule for explosion, you need something stronger than the logic itself, but stronger than the rule of explosion. That things can have, like, I mean, you're talking about bivalence, as we were discussing recently in the Aristotle paper, most clearly, that even Aristotle was just like, you can't argue for this, because the form of the arguments are just like, you're going to get yourself into trouble. And that's the thing here. You've got these ideas about belief in this paper that you're using to marshal as a normative argument for the anti-explosion. But this seems like a nice argument for relevance logic, for that matter, that there has to be some sort of... Yeah, this is my problem with the thing. Actually, this isn't a bad paper, I just think it sort of misses its target. That you need to... This is like fodder for the relevance logicians, that, yeah, what has to happen is that if you're going to have if you're going to understand things in a certain way, then in this way, then you have relevant reasons for believing conclusions. You shouldn't have random conclusions following from your beliefs. If they're inconsistent, they should be relevantly related. So I just feel like this isn't a bad paper. I just feel like it needed to be redirected somewhere slightly different, and I'm not quite putting my finger on exactly what. But again, the non-super clear distinction about power consistency and dialethism, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe that's really it. I'm not quite got the understanding I need of some of the work that's gone into this ahead of time to get the force of where it's going. To me, it just seems like, yeah, sure, go deal with the relevance logic to when you want these defeasible reasons, because it seems more like we're talking about defeasibility here, not the belief stuff. You want to have defeasible beliefs, and the belief is just sort of there, but it's not the real target. The real target is the defeasibility, and that would be going to why the conclusions are relevant compared to the premises. Okay, but that's it. Thank you very much for watching. You can send me a message if you want me to, if you have something you want me to review, and I'll be back. Actually, maybe I'll do another one after this. So I'll be back in a few minutes, and then I'll probably come back tonight and do another one because there's nothing else to do. Bye.